Good afternoon. I'm Michael Bryant, and I serve as the Vice President for Strategic Planning, Faith Integration, and Christian Leadership here at Charleston Southern University. I also serve in the Whitfield Center for Christian Leadership, which is passionate about equipping individuals for leadership and service with the biblical worldview serving as a foundation. We're privileged this afternoon to have with us Dan Reiland from 12 Stone Church in Georgia. Dan, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Michael. My pleasure to be here and enjoy this time with you.
Yeah, we're so thankful that you're here with us. Dan's going to tell us a little bit more about himself in just a moment, but Dan has varied experience in the local church with leadership, specifically with John Maxwell. And we're just thrilled to have him here. And we have some questions that we want to share with him that we can learn more about leadership. And these questions relate to his leadership journey, some basics related to leadership, and then just some practical suggestions for growing as a leader.
Yeah.
And so, Dan, let's just start by you telling us about your self, a little bit, your background.
Sure. Well, we always, I guess, background is family. So at least that's what that means to me. So I have to start by telling you that we have our first grandchild, which is
Congratulations.
the best. We have a little girl, my son-in-law and daughter, and she's just the best. We just fell in love with our little first granddaughter, and so that's great. But I've been married 39 years. Oops, I better get that right. 39 years. My wife Patty is awesome. We have two kids. My daughter Mackenzie is a stay-at-home mom, but her background is in filmmaking. Her husband's in filmmaking, and he's works on the production team at Victory Church here in Atlanta.
Mhm.
And born and raised in San Diego. How about that?
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Very good. Well, let's go ahead and talk about something I think that's very important for students to understand. Tell us about your calling. How do you understand your calling? Maybe how God revealed what your calling would be.
It's a great question, Michael. It's one that so many ask, faith-based people wondering, about purpose in life and what are we called to do. Mine, for some people, they're called to leadership, wherever it might be, is more an instantaneous moment. They just know. For others, it's more progressive. Mine was clearly on the progressive side. I was actually a criminal justice administration major in college. And at San Diego State University, I ended up as a private investigator
Wow.
for a short time because I did the pre-law thing, police science, probation, parole. I didn't like any of them. And when you exhaust the system, there's nothing left except a PI. So I did that. And the whole time God was slowly revealing to me really what he wanted me to do, that he had other plans. I probably should have realized that when all the other men and women in my major were deep in the justice system somewhere, trying to find part-time jobs and earn their way through college. And I was always in the church. I was always leading something. God had always had me doing something. And at a very, very young age, rising kind of quickly in it. And then I think other leaders started to speak into my life. They started to notice things and speak things in and say, have you considered, this seems like this makes sense for you. I'll tell, there's several stories I can tell, but I'll tell you one that's kind of, well, actually was very impacting. So I was a senior in high school and just got saved. I didn't say yes to Jesus until Easter of 1973. Can you believe that? A long time ago. So I was a kid back then and just a baby, 18 years old, I guess. And so I was moving up, and it was a large church, moving up from the high school ministry to the college ministry. And so it's my first day in this room of 150 college students or something like that. And so I'm sitting in the back, I'm a college freshman. And at the end of the class, I don't know if it's class, but at the end of the ministry, whatever it was on Sunday morning, the outgoing pastor of the college ministry and the incoming pastor of the college ministry and the high school pastor, they're up front saying all the things they say. And they said, by the way, is there anybody named Dan Reiland in the room? Mm-hmm. And I thought, I haven't been here long enough to get in trouble. What possibly could I have done? And they said, we need to have lunch with you. And at lunch, they said, God told us you're supposed to help us lead this college ministry.
Wow.
And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I just became a Christian like a few weeks ago. I don't want. And that started something. I'm obviously abbreviating the story. That started something quite supernatural that actually never stopped. And so now there was still a lot of ins and outs and stumbles and falls to get, all the way through. But there was that spot where God began to make himself very real and very clear.
That's great. It's great how God works and how God moves in their life. How did you come to your current role or your current place of service at 12 Stone?
Yeah, a good question. Those how we progress in leadership actually matters. How'd you get there, kind of a thing. Well, obviously from criminal justice, I had although it's amazing how background in the criminal mind can help in the church, but we won't go there.
True.
So I had no theological training whatsoever.
Uh-huh.
And so, but I had great experience in a large church, a leadership oriented church. So I went to seminary. I just asked the people around me, who had gone there, gone ahead of me. I said, what do I do? They said, well, go to seminary. Well, where do I go? Go here. Okay. And then I served in churches there. I began to learn what it meant to actually lead. So after seminary, I started as John Maxwell's first intern in San Diego.
Oh, wow.
And my claim to fame, Michael, is that I broke the internship. I was his first and last intern. He said, we're never doing this again. This doesn't work. We're not just having people run around getting donuts and sitting and listening. We're going to have leaders lead. And so my claim to fame is I broke John Maxwell's internship. But there's redemption to the story. And that is, at the same time, he said, but he calls me Dano. He said, Dano, I'd like you to stay with me. Why don't you come aboard? And I've got a position on staff as a pastor. And that launched 20 years together. We're still very, very close. I love him to death. I'm so grateful for him. We text and talk quite often. And from there, real quickly, the Enjoy, I don't know if you ever remember the Enjoy Ministries cassette tapes. Can you remember that? Way back. So we came here and served churches for a long, long time. I was his executive pastor by the end of our time in San Diego. And then at Enjoy, we served many, many churches. And then I was at North Point with Andy Stanley, served on the board there and learned under his brilliant leadership. And then 19 years ago, can you believe it? I joined the staff here at 12 Stone.
Wow. Okay.
As the executive pastor, doing what I do and having a blast.
Wow. Wonderful. So you've had experience in different venues, different churches, different areas. So that's really good. This will probably be difficult for you to narrow down, but who've been some mentors in your life, some leadership mentors who served as a role model or who mentored you in some way? And if you could discuss specifically, not just name them, but also talk about how they influenced you, that would be helpful.
Yeah. Well, you're right. This one, we could spend the rest of our time here, and because I've been so blessed to be poured into that feel very passionate about pouring into others. It's hard to keep when you've been given so much to keep it all to yourself. But there are like I said, you mentioned I mentioned there are many from Keith, from Rich Lobby to Keith Drury. There's just so many I've been blessed with, but John Maxwell clearly has been a long-term mentor, and he all of these men, they believed in me, they told me the truth, they helped me get better. I'm still blessed today with mentors. John, of course, Sam Chan, Bob Taylor. Actually, I think I'm mentored by a lot of 20-somethings because I learn a lot. We have a lot of young staff, and I intentionally want to know what they think and what TV they watch and what books they read and why they think the way they think. And I'm actually mentored by young people, and they I get to mentor as well. So.
Do you have a formal, or you don't have to name the person, but are you formally mentoring someone now or a group now or?
Always.
Okay.
I would say in two forms, Michael. One is we call it kind of flexible and one's formal. I don't have time for a lot of the formal arrangements where it's an arranged kind of a thing. And I maybe have room for 4 or 5 at a time, but I actually get to coach dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens on more of a flexible. They just call with me. They catch me on the run. We get to talk, and it's just it's just a great. And of course, there's staff, and that's a little bit. That's kind of in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
We're coaching all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about how, or we can go into depth or whatever you want there. But I do get
Mm-hmm.
to coach now, and actually, my role has evolved, and I'm doing more of that now than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you, so I'll let you describe what it's like because is it more your mentoring now? Is it more just conversations that you have with people, questions that they bring to you, or is it a matter of you saying, "Hey, read this book or read these books and let's talk about it"?
Yeah.
How does that work?
That's a great question. It's a combination of both, but driven more first by their questions. I really try hard. I'm quite intentional about getting to know who they are. Second, I want to find out their agenda and get on their agenda and stay on their agenda. And so they literally bring the questions, but the questions are going to spark some guidance I can give or books I might resource with. But the conversations are really more to help them discover, in many cases, what they already know. Sometimes they don't.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when they're younger, they don't even know quite yet what questions to ask, and we can help with that. But it's that kind of a relationship. It's very, very, very little program
Okay.
and a whole lot of who are you? Where do you want to go? Let me help you get there. Maybe a little quicker, maybe help you get there because you might not have gotten there on your own.
Mm-hmm. So if we could maybe chase the rabbit real quickly, we have students listening who are interested in developing as servant leaders. What makes a good mentee and what makes a bad mentee? So if students want to grow and to learn as leaders and understand about leadership, obviously they should take a certain posture, they should have a certain attitude, but the mentees that learn from you the best are what kind of mentees, and those who don't typically learn as well are what kind of mentees?
Yeah. Uh, One is that there's got to be a drive and a hunger. They have to want it. You can't coach somebody who doesn't want to be coached.
Mhm.
So they have to want it. They have to be hungry. Second, I think they have to be good at something. They don't have to be good at the thing that they want to do, but when they're good at something, they've demonstrated there's something within them that has the discipline and ability to pursue, uh, and then that they have the discipline to practice.
Mhm.
So they come in with drive. They come in with they're good at something, and then kind of the outbound of each time we get to talk, there's they practice. They go
Mhm.
work on what we said.
Mhm.
And they don't have to do everything I say, obviously, but they go practice. And then when they come back, they say, this is what I did. This is what worked. This didn't work. So what I'm getting at in the big picture, Michael, is it's an active engagement. It's not just let's just sit and talk.
Mhm.
Uh, I want to say something that I don't want to sound arrogant or bad or anything, but there's not enough time for me to do that with somebody. There's
Mhm.
too many people who really want to grow and really want to learn and really want to do something. And if you just want to have a cup of coffee, well, that's fun, but there's a lot of people who can do that with you.
Mhm.
So that's the difference.
So like purpose, people that are very intentional
Yeah,
about growing and they have a purpose, and that would be
yeah,
very, very significant. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, that's good. That's very helpful. And
Thank-
I think it's helpful for our students to understand that because they have to know how to learn. They have to know the posture that they need to take, the attitudes they need to demonstrate in order to learn. How would you define leadership, Christian leadership, specifically related to your profession? So you serve in the context of the local church, and even a student who may not feel called to be a pastor
Sure.
or a student minister, they can still learn from your definition. So how would you define Christian leadership?
Well, for me, leadership is defined by one word. And if you've read much by John, you know. But let's unpack it a little bit. So I believe that leadership is influence. Period. One word. It's influence. That's it. And everybody has influence. Everybody has influence. Some
Mhm.
people have a whole lot more than a whole lot less, but it's really about how you cultivate your influence, what you do with it, and how you increase it.
Mhm.
Because the thing about influence is it never stays the same. ever.
Mhm.
It's like relationship. There's no such thing as a neutral relationship. It's either getting better or it's getting worse. And with influence, you're either increasing your influence or your influence is decreasing. It never stays the same.
Mhm.
Interesting, in a local church, it can feel like or look like or be perceived like it's staying the same because the local church, while it's weighty, it moves slower. Business moves faster, church moves slower,
Mhm.
but the church weighs heavier because the stakes are higher.
Mhm.
And so because it tends to move slower, because it's relationally based, it can look like your influence is steady, but I promise it's either rising or lowering. So again, it depends on what you do with it. Now, so for me, Michael, as a Christian leader, influence is it's not for yourself. It's not for climbing a ladder. It's not for a
Mhm.
bigger church. It's for advancing God's kingdom by helping people become more mature in their faith.
Mhm.
It's for other people's good. Here's a phrase we say here a lot. It's hard to walk down the hall without hearing somebody say, next to the favor of God, everything rises and falls on leadership.
Mhm.
Because without leadership, nothing moves forward. Without leadership, there's no change. Without leadership, there's no improvement. Without leadership, there's no innovation. Without leadership, you end up with chaos. Leaders just make life better for people. That's
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, and you sort of touched on a question that I wanted to ask. You've pretty much answered it already, but you may want to expound some more. Um, why leadership matters? Why is leadership so important? If you could tell our students why they should even care about developing as a leader, because some students are going to say, I'm not a leader. I'm just not a leader,
Yeah,
right? Some people will say that.
yeah.
Others will say, well, I am, and then still others will say, I really am, but maybe I can't articulate why it's so important. So what would you tell our students as to why leadership matters so much?
Sure, sure. Well, and you're right. I kind of alluded to it, but let me take it to a different direction. Alluding meaning there's no forward movement, there's no change, there's no improvement, there's no innovation, those kind of things. But let's take it to a sphere we can all connect to for a moment. Let's take the family. If
Mhm.
there's no leadership in your home, it's chaos. It breaks down. It doesn't go anywhere. Second law of thermodynamics takes place. And you can,
Mhm.
any way you want to say it, things go backwards when they don't go forward.
Mhm.
That's a little bit elementary, but it's kind of true. If there's not somebody in the home, mom and dad, however your theology shapes that out, um, leading you forward, you literally, there is no stasis. That you're not going to stay the same. You're going to slide backwards. And as a family, as a culture, as a unit, in relationships. But when somebody there has a vision or a picture, say of family values or family traditions or family memories, someone has to lead that forward because it will not happen by itself.
Mhm. Very
Does
good.
that,
Very good.
does that make sense?
Yeah, it's helpful. It's helpful, and I think our students will appreciate that. Talking about your role as an executive pastor or pastor, I know that administration is going to be a big component of that. I'm sure there are other responsibilities that you have, but could you maybe describe how you exercise leadership very practically in your current role?
Sure, sure. And I should say that my role has evolved over 19 years. The size of an organization, just like the size of a family, it changes your responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the beginning, it was very full executive pastor roles. And it's interesting that you brought up the word administrative. So let me just stop there for a second because I think in a lot of professions, administrative takes a different nature. And in the local church, I think in business as well, actually, I'm sure, um, in the church, there's two huge lanes different in administrative tasks. One is more finance, buildings, administration kinds of things, IT, tech, uh, really the more true administrative function. That's never been my role. I can barely count. They would never let me run the money.
Okay.
And then the other side is more ministries, leadership development, just the what the church actually does.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where have spent all my life. And that is really three areas. We all do 29 things, right? But
Mm-hmm.
three big buckets would be: one is staff, coaching, culture, development, those kinds of things,
Mm-hmm.
hiring, firing, then leadership development in the church and on the staff. And then what I call ministry architecture.
Mhm.
Strategic design, meaning what ministries we do, what ministries we don't do, why, what's broken, what's working, what needs to be fixed, that kind of a thing.
Mhm.
Um, and so you wanted to get practical, what skills are required and actually some examples. So we'll do that.
Okay.
I think in this role or roles like this, and by the way, now I'm focusing much more on just culture and development.
Mhm.
But again, that's an evolved thing. But so I think at the top of the list, Michael, it has to be a people orientation, people skills, people savvy, whatever you want. You have to be able to read a room,
Mhm.
not be kind of oblivious to what's happening around you. That's just essential. And that walks right into coaching abilities. I think resilience is a big thing. You have to
Mhm.
be able to bounce back from a setback.
Mhm.
Strategic skills, meaning how to move a vision forward, see the big picture.
In a
That's
setback, if I
kind of
could
hmm?
if I could jump in here, a setback in the local church might be what, like wanting to accomplish something and people saying, we don't want to go in that direction, or what kind of setback, practically speaking, do you have?
Well, I'll give one that's happened for an entire year, for almost for a year for everybody. COVID, that's a setback when the doors are closed. And so now what
Mhm.
do you do? And
Mhm.
how do you open them? And how do you, now people's habits are, that's a major setback. A
Mhm.
financial setback, you don't have maybe the funds to see the vision forward.
Mhm.
It could be a staffing setback, a key person left. There's it could be, I like your example is good. The people are not buying into the vision.
Mhm.
So many possible setbacks. And
Mhm.
you just have to be resilient. You don't quit. You don't go to another place. You say, it's my job to lead. Let's figure out how to fix this. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, one
So
of the, oh, I'm
yeah,
sorry, you go ahead.
please go, please.
When we talk to our students, specifically in the Leadership Institute, when we talk about leadership, we use various metaphors. We use the metaphor of servant, we use the metaphor of shepherd, and we also use the metaphor of steward. Servant, shepherd, steward. Would steward be the metaphor that would relate mostly to what you do, or would you pick a different metaphor or several metaphors?
I think shepherd always has to be in there somewhere because we have to, you have to care about the people. If you don't care, and caring is not automatic.
Mhm.
If you don't care about the people that you serve, it's not going to work.
Mhm.
But you shepherd differently according to the size of the organization. A
Mhm.
smaller organization, you shepherd, you're right with the people. But the larger the organization is, you shepherd through layers of leaders. And so you care for the leaders around you. But there's, it isn't. What was the other options you gave?
Shepherd, servant, and steward.
Yeah. I think, you know what, Michael, I love the question. I think it's all of them because you're definitely a servant.
Mhm.
But you just, again, the size of the organization, you serve differently. And
Mhm.
then absolutely stewardship. You're stewarding the gifts God's given you personally. You're stewarding the resources that have come in from the church. Honestly, as a part of my story, or when people ask me about why, Dan, why didn't you ever become a senior pastor?
Mhm.
Why didn't you go up and get a real job? Why have you always been number two all your life? And honestly, my answer has been quite clear the whole time. It's stewardship.
Mhm.
I just asked myself, or God told me, I don't know, um, where could I make the biggest kingdom impact? Meaning, I'll make up numbers because it doesn't matter. Would I senior pastor a church of 1,000
Mhm.
or executive pastor a church of 10,000?
Mhm.
Well, I want to touch as many people as possible.
Mhm.
So for me, that's a stewardship question.
Mhm. And I guess God, the Lord had to lead you to a place where you recognize that there are certain roles where He wants you to serve and certain roles where He doesn't.
That's right.
And so was that primarily inclination, gifting, what people said to you, opportunities, all the above, or how did He lead you to say to make the decision to serve in this or that role?
Yeah, it was gifting. I think the primary one was people speaking into me and the opportunities that arose.
Mhm.
My primary gifting is not communication. I do a lot of teaching, like leadership talks,
Mhm.
And I've done plenty of preaching, but that's not my first skill or my fastball, so to speak.
Mhm.
As a matter of fact, a lot of coaching that I get to do now is helping younger leaders find their lane and find their fastball, because they want to do this because they think that's the cool thing. And I think, but you know what? I think you're good at this over here. Let's try this out.
Mhm.
And I want to say something too, because I don't want anybody to misunderstand my references to size of a church.
Mhm.
When I said, 1,000 or 10,000, God calls people to senior pastor small churches, and that's significant and powerful and important work.
Mhm.
But there's also the notion of stewardship. That's all. Yeah,
Mhm. Very good.
yeah.
Very good. Let's transition and talk about maybe a few basic things related to leadership. Certainly, I hope are relevant, for students in our time. Character in your profession, the character of leaders in your profession. What role does character play? And without naming names or getting specific, my goodness, the past year or so, there have been so many pastors who have fallen. Um, yeah, and so talk about character.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about that, because you are so right. And whether you look at in any profession, unfortunately, the ones who stumble are they're the minority, but they get lifted up and they get attacked. But it's the same everywhere. Teachers, police officers, lawyers, pastors. Character's everything. When you lose your integrity, when ethics are out the window, here's the thing: you lose trust.
Hmm.
And when you lose trust, it's game over.
Hmm.
Right? And it's not that trust can't be restored, but it's painful and slow. And if the breach of trust, if the breach of character or ethics is high enough, you really don't get to do it again. There's a forward sequence we use as we teach leadership here. Um, and it speaks to this really well. It's kind of a fun talk to do for an hour, because it's literally leadership in 4 words, but I'll do it in a minute and a half or something. Okay.
Hmm.
But the words are heart, connect, trust, and follow. And if you were to draw them across a line or scribble them on a napkin, you'd write the word heart down, put a little arrow to connect, a little arrow to trust and follow. And it's simply this: all leadership begins at a heart level.
Hmm.
That's not a big ethereal idea. That just simply means, Michael, you be yourself. That's the best way to lead. You be a real, authentic you. When you do that, you can connect. That's the next one. You can connect with people. When you connect with people, at a heart level, then they'll trust you. And when they trust you, they'll follow you. Let me say it in reverse, because you can really see the power of it when I say it backwards.
Hmm.
People will not follow people they do not trust. People can't trust people with whom they cannot connect, and they can't connect with anybody with whom they can't find their heart. And so that's character. That's a, it's just a big, big deal. Thanks for asking that.
Hmm. Um, do you have you seen common patterns among church leaders that causes them to go in the wrong direction morally? Uh, what are some of those patterns? What are some of those mistakes, like a rejection of authority or stop having their quiet time or something? I mean, have you seen some constants in people's lives that you would want to communicate to students to say, hey, these are some red flags, avoid these?
Absolutely. That would be a fun interview to do the whole thing.
Hmm.
Obviously, I'm going to just take for 2 seconds to chime in on the one you mentioned. Their intimacy with the Father, with Jesus, is faded.
Hmm.
That's a given. Thank you for saying that. I'm going to say near the top of the list is too much pressure. The responsibilities kept growing and growing, and whether it was organized or unorganized or chaos or not, there's too much pressure, and leaders have a great deal of difficulty handling when the pressure gets too high and you don't know what to do with pressure. That's a whole other deal. And
You mean like expectations of perform? I mean, I don't want to use the word performance, but expectations to preach a good sermon or to lead. I mean, the pressure. What do you mean by pressure exactly?
well, all that, you could be on the negative side of people pleasing, expectations, too much, but really on the side that gets to everybody, it's just so much to do.
Mhm.
There's the demands are so many, and you're never done with all your work, and there's always somebody else that you could help. After a while, that's just a lot of pressure.
Mhm.
And then what happens is when the pressure, then the second part of that, I know that in my mind there was two parts and they weren't coming out. It's speed and pressure.
Mhm.
So the more you have to do, the higher the pressure goes, the faster you have to do things. Well, the faster you have to do things, the greater the pressure becomes. And this starts to circle on you, and you can just crack. And Moses did. I mean, the people, remember Aaron is the story, and Moses and he just cracked.
Mhm.
And we can crack under pressure. That's why sometimes I have a lot of grace for leaders that break, because I don't think most of them aren't evil. Most of them didn't sit there and plot it with malice. The pressure got too big, and the temptations to cheat, again, not because they were evil, because the pressure was so high.
Mhm.
And I'm not making excuses for anybody. I'm just
Sure.
saying it happens easier than we think.
Mhm.
And so the healthy things to do in that case is to know what your healthy pressure relief valves are. How do you stay healthy as a person, from things that you and I know, from diet to exercise to quiet time, just to keep those healthy rhythms in your life. Uh, that's only one thing I mentioned. I don't want to take a whole time with this, but maybe a quick mention to a couple others, because this is such a great question.
Mhm.
Another one is the people who are around you. Who's your inner circle?
Mhm.
Do they lift you? Do they drain you? Do they take you up a notch, or do they pull you down a notch? The people you're around and the environments that you're in, huge, huge,
Mhm.
huge deal. I better stop there, but those are some of the things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very good. Very, very good perspective. I'm sure our students will appreciate that. Um, how, practically speaking, how can students grow as a leader? Um, what would you tell them to do? I mean, I'm not suggesting that you could just read a few books and be a leader, or go through this program, or sit under this person and be mentored. But if someone wanted to be intentional about growing as a Christian leader, what would be some very practical things they could do, the students could do?
Yeah. Well, I think I will chime in on the thing that doesn't necessarily make you a leader, but is a gigantic contribution to it, would be reading books on leadership.
Mhm.
And there's many, many of them out there. But I'll go back to your question specifically. I think let me say the obvious, if I can be Captain Obvious for a second,
Mhm.
and say, to be a Christian leader, you need to be a Christian first.
Mhm.
And that might be ridiculously like Captain Obvious, but I've actually coached in churches who miss fundamental questions in hiring staff, like, are you a Christian? Tell me your story. They
Mhm.
literally, because, and again, they're not bad, they just assume things. In today's culture, you can't assume anything.
Sure.
You've
Mhm.
got to, so um, number one, I think you need to, I think to grow as a leader, you need to accept a leadership role. So it has to go beyond a book. It has to go beyond a cool, podcast.
Mhm.
So accept a leadership role somewhere. If you don't get picked for a role, go volunteer for a role. I promise there's an organization somewhere who will take your time
Right. There
and
is.
they'll give you an opportunity and they'll let you lead. I think more important than the leadership role you pick is the environment you choose.
Mhm.
Always, 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 when you want to grow, always, even when you're getting your first jobs, always choose the healthy environment over the perfect job, always. Because if you're in your formative years in a negative environment trying to learn leadership, it's rough. So
Mhm.
get in a good environment, and do anything you possibly can. Then I would say, be curious, ask questions, do more than has asked, but that was asked of you.
Mhm.
uh, Experiment, take risks, just lead,
Mhm.
make something happen, move the ball down the field.
Mhm. Yeah, I like your emphasis on personal responsibility. Leading yourself in the sense of taking initiative. I think sometimes students will find themselves maybe serving in a church or a ministry role or some kind of leadership role, and their boss or their supervisor doesn't take an interest in mentoring them or doesn't seem very interested in their professional development, their spiritual development. And it can become frustrating
Yep.
sometimes to students. I mean, I've seen employees become very frustrated, and it's as if, well, how can I ever grow as a leader if my boss or my supervisor or the one over me doesn't invest in me? What would you say to someone who says that?
Well, first, all leadership begins with self-awareness.
Mhm.
And then secondly, you grow best, you actually grow as a leader best in the role that you're given to lead in. In other words, you're responsible for your own growth.
Mhm.
Period. You're responsible for your own growth. So if the environment you're in is not providing mentoring or coaching, you go find it. I
Mhm.
promise, somebody will help you. Somebody will give you a 35-minute lunch every quarter. Somebody will do that. They will. Don't
Mhm.
get discouraged if the first person says no. Maybe they don't have time, but somebody will do that.
Mhm.
And coaching isn't every week. That's counseling. Coaching could be quarterly. It could be twice a year.
Mhm.
And the reason for the gap is because you need time to go practice stuff that they said.
Mhm.
One of the things that we'll say to young leaders here a lot who, they do get coaching, but they want to rise quicker. They want to, they just want to rise quickly. And I
Yeah.
say, you here 8.5 minutes. Don't get frustrated that you don't have a next job up.
Yeah.
And what we say is two things. Number one is build something. Build something. If you'll rather than fussing about the job you don't have or the role you don't have, build lean into the thing that somebody picked you for
Mhm.
and build something. Because I promise in any leadership oriented environment, if you build something, you will be noticed. And so if they're not coaching you, find some coaching. But yeah, build something. And then the second part of that is enjoy it.
Mhm.
Enjoy it, enjoy it, enjoy it.
Mhm.
That's I think a big deal there is a two-word coaching tool we can use is fruit and joy. If I can use
Mhm.
a biblical term there, fruit and joy, results, I
Mhm.
love to do this, Michael, and maybe this will speak to anybody we're talking to, is I'll take a napkin over a cup of coffee. Actually, I'm a tea drinker, so a cup of tea. Um, and I'll write two words on the napkin, like fruit and joy.
Mhm.
And I'll just spin the napkin around and push it across the table and say, talk to me. And it always is a fabulous conversation because one or the other of the areas isn't strong for them in the moment. Either things aren't happening, results aren't happening, there's no fruit, or fruit's happening, but they're not happy, they're not having fun. And here's the thing, here's the principle. Uh, it I mentioned I've been doing this for 39 years. You can't go the distance. You can't go the long haul with no joy. You won't make it because leadership with no joy is drudgery and you can't go the distance. On the flip side, if there's joy and no results, that's hollow. It's shallow and you're not going to go the distance. So fruit and joy have to happen together. And that's a great combination for self-coaching.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, very good. I tell you, I know our students will appreciate that. Got to have both the fruit and the joy. You'd mentioned some books in general. Do you have some leadership books that you would recommend, or some websites, or just practical resources? To any stand out to you that you would recommend to students?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's hard for me to do because I'm a book lover and
Hmm.
I love to find wisdom in the pages, but let me start with podcasts. I think podcasts now are just brilliant. Some of my favorites are Andy Stanley's podcast.
Okay.
Leadership podcast is brilliant. Craig Groeschel, it's brilliant. And one that would speak to maybe a broader audience is Carrie Nieuwhof up in Canada. Nieuwhof,
Hmm.
it's Nieuwhof.
Hmm.
That's quite a name. But because he speaks to leaders across all industries and professions and unique. He's long format interviews,
Hmm.
and they're fascinating on leadership. And there's so many in his catalog. For on books, I'll do a couple of things because it's again, there's just way too many to mention. I'll do it this way. If someone's kind of just starting out, where would I start them? I would start
Mhm.
with John Maxwell's 5 Levels of Leadership. Of
Okay.
all the primers, of all the starting places, that's just such a great foundational book. It's not even written strictly to Christians, but
Mhm.
it's just so foundational. And there's, I think, renditions of it that do show the scripture that it actually all came from.
Mhm.
Um, and then here's another one. If you go to my blog, danreiland.com, and just click on books, it's just not a list of my books. It's it's a list of some of my favorite leadership trainers. I call them trainers,
Okay.
meaning what's not there are the big 400-page Pulitzer Prize winners, Gregory Byrne, I forgot his name, but the Pulitzer Prize winner, his name just went out the door. It's called Just Leadership.
Mhm.
Or like Robert Greenleaf, those
Mhm.
big, gigantic, they're great
Servant
books.
leadership concept.
They're
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. But they're not great trainer. People don't naturally read 400-page books. So the ones I have listed are super practical. They're
Mhm.
great to pick up. They're great to just learn how to lead. And
Mhm.
they're great to teach others how to lead. So if you go to danron.com and just go up the top and click on books, you'll see some great ones there.
Okay. Wonderful. Good. I appreciate you sharing those recommendations. You've been very gracious with your time, and we're almost out of time because I want to respect you know what you may have to do today. But is there maybe a question that I didn't ask you, or is there a topic that we didn't address that in closing you might want to address? Either a question that you think is just fundamental to this conversation, or a topic that you'd like to
Yeah.
raise.
Besides who's going to win the Super Bowl. So yeah, I think there's a question here that we didn't get to do that I would is on the advice I'd give to a student who desires to model biblical leadership in
Hmm.
their profession.
Hmm.
What's the inner source? Again, if we want to go the distance, if you want to make a difference, I think leadership has to start with a burden.
Hmm.
It can't be just a job. It has you the young adult. It doesn't matter what age, but you have to see life and see. Uh, there's a burden in your mind. You see something that needs to be better. You need something that's wrong, something that grabs your heart, something that you need to fix. You think that someone has to do something.
Hmm.
Someone has to make this better. A passion to help people live better. And of course, in this case, within the church, help people live better according to biblical values and biblical principles.
Hmm.
It just can't be a novel thing to do for a while. It's got to start, deep inside, and you see a preferred future, a better way. You just see a better way to what? To help people live better
Hmm.
according to what? Biblical principles.
Hmm. Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of times leaders, some of the strongest leaders, greatest leaders, they see a problem and they recognize, this is not what God wants for his people. This is not what God wants for his world. Um, However you can use me, Lord, use me that I can make a difference for your kingdom. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
wonderful. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to our students. There's so much wisdom here. I think they'll probably go back and listen to this interview maybe 2 or 3 times. But thank you so much. And if you're joining us again, the Whitfield Center for Christian Leadership strives to train Christian leaders using the biblical worldview as the foundation. And we're grateful that you've joined us today. And we would love to have you join us again for future interviews.